Have you ever felt that something was off but couldn't quite put your finger on it? What if I told you that cheating doesn't always start with a kiss or a lie? Sometimes it begins with just a sentence, 6 words, said in the right moment, can lay the groundwork for betrayal hiding in plain sight. It's not always obvious at first, but there's a subtle shift in the air like a breeze before a storm. Imagine hearing these 4 words, casually spoken, perhaps even with kindness. At first, they may sound harmless, even caring, but beneath the surface lies something far darker, a subtle psychological tactic that rewrites the rules of the conversation. It's not a simple dismissal. It's a calculated move to shift blame, deflect accountability, and reroute the focus from the real issue. And in doing so, it sets the stage for emotional invalidation. You think you're seeking answers, clarity, maybe even an explanation, but instead, you find yourself questioning your own thoughts. You're told you're overthinking it, a phrase so deceptively simple, yet incredibly powerful in shifting the blame. What if I told you that in these moments, your thoughts aren't the problem? It's the manipulation at play, the clever deflection that turns the question into the issue, and you into someone who can't trust their own mind. What if I told you that cheating doesn't always begin with a kiss, a lie, or a late-night text? No, sometimes it begins with something far subtler, just a sentence. 6 simple words, spoken casually, perhaps even kindly, can be the first signs of betrayal, hiding right in front of you. At first, you don't see the storm brewing, but you can feel the wind begin to shift. These words are that gentle breeze that precedes the storm. You may think, I'm overthinking it. But what if your instincts are actually trying to tell you something important? At first glance, these 4 words may sound harmless, even caring. They might feel like a gentle attempt at reassurance. But when you look closer, beneath the surface, they reveal a subtle and often deliberate psychological move. It's not just a casual dismissal of your feelings. It's a carefully calculated pivot, a clever way to redirect the conversation and avoid taking responsibility. When a man says this, especially in moments of suspicion, concern, or confrontation, it's usually the beginning of emotional invalidation. He's not just brushing off your comment, he's undermining your entire perception of reality in that very moment. The phrase implies that the issue isn't with his behavior, but rather with your mind's inability to properly process what's happening. It redefines your concern as something irrational, shifting the focus away from him and squarely onto you. Suddenly, you're no longer someone seeking answers or clarity. No, now you're someone with a problem, someone whose thoughts and concerns are unreliable. The question itself is now framed as the problem, and that, my friend, is a masterful deflection. In relationships where infidelity occurs, this tactic of deflection becomes a language in and of itself. It's a tool used to avoid accountability, to sidestep uncomfortable truths. Often, when cheating is taking place, the person involved must live a double life, not just in their actions, but in their narratives. One narrative unfolds in reality, the secret texts, the hotel rooms, the unexplained absences. The other is the version of events they tell you to keep the illusion intact. But sometimes, those 2 stories collide. You see something, you feel something, you ask something, and in those moments, you start to get closer to the truth. This is when he needs a verbal extinguisher, a way to shut down the conversation before you uncover the lies. That's when the phrase, you're overthinking it, surfaces. Not because you're wrong, but because you're dangerously close to being right. What makes this phrase so insidious is that it hijacks the very strength it claims to correct. Overthinking, at its core, is simply analysis. It's an attempt to connect the dots, interpret patterns, and make sense of inconsistencies. In relationships, it's not neurosis, it's survival. The brain is working to protect the heart. But when that survival instinct is dismissed, the damage goes much deeper than words alone. As you reflect on these moments, you might start to see them in a new light. It's not just a phrase, it's a strategy designed to disarm you. It's a weapon in the emotional arsenal used to confuse, control, and evade, and recognizing it for what it is can be the first step in reclaiming your sense of reality and your power. The danger of overthinking it is not that you're imagining things, it's that you're beginning to see too clearly. As you move forward, let's dive deeper into how deflection plays into the broader dynamics of emotional manipulation and how you can start recognizing the signs of manipulation early, before the storm breaks. Keep reading, because understanding this language is key to protecting your heart and mind. As we explored earlier, when someone dismisses your concerns by telling you you're overthinking it, the damage is not only in the words themselves, but in how they erode your ability to trust your own instincts. Over time, this tactic creates a fracture between your natural reactions and your own self-trust. You start to doubt your own perceptions, questioning whether your thoughts and feelings are valid or if you're just imagining things. At first, it seems harmless. You silence your inner questions, telling yourself maybe you're the problem. That's when the subtle damage begins. It's not just gaslighting, though, it certainly feels like it. It's psychological erosion. The reason this tactic works so well is because it taps into one of the deepest human fears, the fear of being irrational. We all have that lingering dread of being labeled as crazy, jealous, or paranoid. No one wants to be the person who causes drama or emotional instability in a relationship. So when someone we care about tells us we're overthinking, we often accept it not because it feels right, but because we're afraid of what might happen if we don't. We don't want to seem difficult. We don't want to make waves. So we suppress our instincts and push down our suspicions in the name of preserving the peace. But here's the catch. What gets preserved is not peace, it's the lie. The longer this pattern continues, the more it begins to define the relationship, and that's where the danger lies. When this phrase is used repeatedly, when it becomes a consistent pattern, it's a major red flag. You should pay close attention, especially when it follows certain behaviors like emotional distancing, unexplained absences, or even small but noticeable changes in routine like new passwords on his phone or sudden secrecy. You might bring something up, a name that keeps popping up, a late night text that doesn't sit right, or a subtle shift in his mood. Instead of addressing your concern transparently, you're met with dismissal. And this isn't just avoidance. This is control. It's not just about him avoiding accountability. It's about keeping you in the dark, keeping you confused, while he operates in the clear. Over time, this deflection becomes a tool to blur your vision, and slowly, you start to internalize the idea that your emotions are the problem, that your thoughts are unreliable. This, my friends, is the very definition of manipulation, not through outright lies, but through the gradual erasure of your right to question what's happening. So, when you hear "you're overthinking it," take a moment. Don't panic. Don't immediately rush to argue, but don't silence yourself either. Pause. Observe. Reflect. It may seem like an insignificant comment, but in those moments when you're encouraged to doubt yourself, thinking clearly could be the most radical and necessary thing you do. Now, let's talk about another phrase often used in the world of emotional manipulation. I need some space. On the surface, this might sound like a reasonable, even mature request. After all, we've all heard that space is healthy, that autonomy can strengthen a relationship, and that sometimes people just need a breather. There's truth to this, especially when it's said with honesty and mutual respect. But in the murky waters of dishonesty and emotional disconnection, this seemingly innocent phrase can take on a very different meaning. It becomes a soft exit, a way out, not a solution. It's a mask, not a message. Instead of inviting healing, it creates emotional distance. And when this phrase comes from someone who is cheating, it often signals that the emotional commitment in the relationship has already begun to fracture, even if it hasn't been openly acknowledged. So, the next time you hear, "I need some space," don't just focus on the words themselves. Pay attention to the context in which they are said. Has this request come out of nowhere without warning? Did it follow a confrontation, an argument, or a moment where he felt exposed? These are the moments you need to pay attention to. It's not the words, but the hidden meaning behind them that tells the story. The cracks in the relationship are starting to show, and understanding this can help you see the truth before it's too late. Next, let's explore the deeper layers of how these manipulative tactics affect not just your perception, but the entire dynamic of the relationship. As we explored earlier, when someone asks for space in a relationship, it's not always about needing room to think. Often, it's about creating a void where accountability can no longer reach. But what he's really saying might not always be so clear. Perhaps in his mind, he's thinking, "I need to disappear without explanation," or even, "I need emotional freedom to connect with someone else," without interruption. These aren't always the words he says directly, but they can be the hidden meaning behind the request for space. It's not always this blunt, of course. Sometimes, even the man himself doesn't consciously understand what he's doing. But subconsciously, he's drawing boundaries that allow dishonesty to thrive. Space is the perfect alibi. It doesn't trigger the same alarms as saying, "I'm done with you," or "I'm seeing someone else." It sounds much more palatable, even noble. But in reality, its true purpose is concealment. What makes this phrase so dangerous is that it appeals to the part of us that wants to be reasonable. When someone we love asks for space, we naturally want to honor that request. We want to be supportive. We tell ourselves that being clingy or demanding won't help the situation. So, we back off, thinking we're doing the right thing. We give him the space he asks for, but in doing so, we might actually be giving up our visibility in his life. We step away just as something begins to unfold in the shadows. And when that space grows larger, when the texts slow down, the calls go unanswered, and the "I love you" becomes less frequent, you start to realize that what he actually wanted wasn't space. What he wanted was distance from consequence. There's also a deeper emotional dynamic at play here. When someone cheats, they often experience two conflicting feelings at once: guilt and resentment. Guilt because they know they're betraying someone who trusts them, and resentment because that very trust feels like a trap, especially when it starts to clash with their secret desires. "I need space" becomes the sentence that resolves both of these feelings. It relieves the guilt by making it sound like a natural need, and it soothes the resentment by pushing you away without any confrontation. It's a win-win for him and a slow bleed for you. Many people who hear this phrase immediately start blaming themselves. They think, "Maybe I've been too much. Maybe I should have given him more room earlier." While self-reflection can be healthy, this line of thinking misses the core issue. Space should never be used as a shield from truth. It should never be vague, indefinite, or weaponized. If someone truly needs space to grow, that request should come with communication, reassurance, and structure. But when the request is dropped suddenly, like a smoke bomb, especially after you start getting too close to the truth, it's no longer a need, it's a tactic. Not everything vague is mysterious. Sometimes it's just a cover. "Don't be so insecure," he might say. But these words are like a scalpel disguised as a comforting gesture, cutting away at your trust and your sense of security. The more you give him space, the more you start to lose your footing. You start questioning everything, the very foundation of your relationship. Now, let's dive deeper into how these subtle tactics play into the larger picture of emotional manipulation and why it's crucial to recognize them before they have a chance to create an even bigger divide. As we've discussed earlier, the request for space often masks deeper issues in a relationship. Now, let's dive into another tactic that subtly manipulates the dynamics of trust and emotional stability. When someone says, "You're just being insecure," on the surface, it may appear to be an attempt to calm the situation, to restore some balance and ease. But what's really happening beneath that seemingly benign statement? At first, it sounds like a simple plea for peace, a request for a little emotional steadiness, a way to reassure you that things will be okay. But when a man uses this phrase in response to your concerns, especially when those concerns are rooted in real changes, inconsistencies, or emotional disconnection, it becomes far more than just a request for security. It transforms into a redirection of guilt. You go from being the one who's noticing something wrong to suddenly being accused of causing the problem. This phrase carries with it an inherent accusation. It doesn't merely suggest that you're wrong. It implies that there's something wrong with you for even asking the question. And once that implication settles in, it begins to erode your sense of certainty. Now, the issue is no longer about his distant behavior or possible dishonesty. It's about your reaction. Why are you so anxious? Why are you being so clingy? Why can't you just let things go? What started as a legitimate emotional observation shifts into something else entirely. It becomes your emotional dysfunction, not his behavior. That's the core of this tactic, to shift the burden of emotional accountability from his actions to your perception of those actions. It's a subtle form of manipulation, and it doesn't always come in the form of explosive arguments. In fact, it often arrives quietly, subtly, sometimes even with a smile. It sounds reasonable, measured, even wise at times. But therein lies the danger, because when emotional manipulation is wrapped in calm language, it becomes much harder to recognize and far easier to internalize. And once you internalize it, that's where the damage truly begins. You start to second guess not just what you saw or heard, but how you feel about it. Doubt creeps in. And once you begin to distrust your own emotional signals, you become easier to control, easier to dismiss, easier to keep in the dark. Insecurity is a universal human experience. Everyone at some point feels doubt, fear, or vulnerability. These are natural, inevitable parts of life. But calling someone insecure at a time when they're simply expressing a legitimate concern? That's not empathy. That's a shutdown. It's a way of signaling that the emotional space between you no longer welcomes questions, suspicions, or the truth. And when this pattern repeats itself, it doesn't just silence the conversation, it rewires your understanding of what's acceptable in a relationship. You begin walking on emotional eggshells, hesitant to ask any questions because you fear they'll be used against you. The irony? The person calling you insecure is often fully aware of why you're feeling that way. He knows that his late replies, his guarded phone, his sudden emotional distance, his unexplained protectiveness over a friend, these are all behaviors that have planted seeds of confusion in you. But instead of acknowledging this and offering the reassurance you need, he chooses to call you insecure, not because he's trying to make you feel better, but because it's easier for him to avoid the discomfort of his own actions. This is emotional laziness wrapped in a guise of concern. As we move forward, let's explore how this pattern of manipulation plays out over time and how you can start recognizing and responding to these subtle cues before they take root in your emotional well-being. As we've seen earlier, these phrases often serve as a way to redirect guilt and shift emotional responsibility. But there's another layer to this behavior that often goes unnoticed: the subtle control it establishes over the relationship. When someone constantly tells you, "You're being insecure," what they're really saying is, "I don't want to face the consequences of how my actions are making you feel, so I'll make you deal with those feelings instead." It's a manipulative tactic disguised as reassurance. Once you accept that you're the insecure one, you're less likely to challenge their behavior. You want to prove that you're not jealous, not irrational, that you're not the problem. So, you begin to suppress your emotions, edit your questions, and pretend everything is fine. But here's the catch. That restraint doesn't bring peace. It just gives them more room to continue doing what they've been doing behind your back. The act of holding everything in of performing emotional stability slowly unravels you inside. It doesn't solve the problem. It just silences the one who's brave enough to voice it. She's just a friend. These 4 words have been used for decades to soften suspicion, shut down conversations, and mask betrayal in plain sight. On the surface, they seem harmless, even comforting. They're presented as a declaration of boundaries, a way to reassure you that nothing is going on. But when these words are spoken in the context of secrecy, emotional withdrawal, or patterns of dishonesty, they're often a smokescreen rather than the truth. They're designed to disarm concern without actually addressing the core issue. Instead of clearing the air, they fill it with doubt, forcing you to question your instincts rather than the behavior that triggered them. When a man says, "she's just a friend," the real issue is rarely just the friendship itself. It's the context in which that friendship exists. Has she suddenly started appearing more frequently in conversations, in texts, in photos, in moments of emotional priority? Does his demeanor change when he talks about her, though? His eyes light up in a way that they don't when he talks about you? Does he become unusually defensive when you bring her up? These are the subtle clues that the bond between them may not be as innocent as it seems. But instead of addressing those concerns, he shuts the door on your worry by labeling your discomfort as an overreaction. She's just a friend. This phrase relies entirely on trust it, assumes that you'll take it at face value and move on. But trust in a healthy relationship isn't built just on words. It's built on consistent, transparent behavior. But instead of acknowledging this and offering the reassurance you need, he chooses to call you insecure, not because he's trying to make you feel better, but because it's easier for him to avoid the discomfort of his own actions. This is emotional laziness wrapped in a guise of concern. As we move forward, let's explore how this pattern of manipulation plays out over time and how you can start recognizing and responding to these subtle cues before they take root in your emotional well-being. As we've seen earlier, these phrases often serve as a way to redirect guilt and shift emotional responsibility. But there's another layer to this behavior that often goes unnoticed: the subtle control it establishes over the relationship. When someone constantly tells you you're being insecure, what they're really saying is, "I don't want to face the consequences of how my actions are making you feel, so I'll make you deal with those feelings instead." It's a manipulative tactic disguised as reassurance. Once you accept that you're the insecure one, you're less likely to challenge their behavior. You want to prove that you're not jealous, not irrational, that you're not the problem. So, you begin to suppress your emotions, edit your questions, and pretend everything is fine. But here's the catch. That restraint doesn't bring peace. It just gives them more room to continue doing what they've been doing behind your back. The act of holding everything in of performing emotional stability slowly unravels you inside. It doesn't solve the problem. It just silences the one who's brave enough to voice it. She's just a friend. These 4 words have been used for decades to soften suspicion, shut down conversations, and mask betrayal in plain sight. On the surface, they seem harmless, even comforting. They're presented as a declaration of boundaries, a way to reassure you that nothing is going on. But when these words are spoken in the context of secrecy, emotional withdrawal, or patterns of dishonesty, they're often a smokescreen rather than the truth. They're designed to disarm concern without actually addressing the core issue. Instead of clearing the air, they fill it with doubt, forcing you to question your instincts rather than the behavior that triggered them. When a man says, "she's just a friend," the real issue is rarely just the friendship itself. It's the context in which that friendship exists. Has she suddenly started appearing more frequently in conversations, in texts, in photos, in moments of emotional priority? Does his demeanor change when he talks about her, though? His eyes light up in a way that they don't when he talks about you? Does he become unusually defensive when you bring her up? These are the subtle clues that the bond between them may not be as innocent as it seems. But instead of addressing those concerns, he shuts the door on your worry by labeling your discomfort as an overreaction. She's just a friend. This phrase relies entirely on trust. It assumes that you'll take it at face value and move on. But trust in a healthy relationship isn't built just on words. It's built on consistent, transparent behavior. It's not what's being said, but what's being left unsaid and intentionally hidden. You're being dramatic. This might sound like an offhand comment or even a joke, but when said in the middle of a serious conversation, especially one involving trust, loyalty, or suspicion, it's far from harmless. This phrase is a classic example of emotional minimization, a tactic used not to soothe, but to silence. When a man uses "you're being dramatic" in response to your concerns about his behavior, he's not diffusing the situation. He's invalidating your reality. It's not a disagreement, it's a dismissal. And when infidelity is involved, dismissal is one of the most powerful tools he can use to keep his secret intact. At its core, calling someone dramatic reframes the issue, shifting the focus away from his actions and onto your supposed overreaction. So, how do you break free from this psychological trap? Let's explore the strategies you can use to reclaim your power, trust your instincts, and protect yourself from emotional manipulation. As we've discussed, the subtle tactic of "you're being dramatic" is not just a way to deflect the conversation, it's a deliberate move to undermine your emotional expression. It shifts the focus from the legitimacy of what you're saying to the tone or intensity with which you're saying it. This is a classic deflection. Instead of addressing why you feel hurt, confused, or suspicious, he critiques the way you're expressing those emotions. Now, instead of defending your point, you're forced to defend your emotions. This may seem like a small move, but it's incredibly effective because it derails the conversation entirely. It undermines your confidence in how you communicate, and you begin to question yourself. Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe I should calm down. But in doing so, the question that should have been asked the original concerned disappears under a cloud of self-doubt. The issue is left unaddressed, and you're left to wrestle with your own feelings of inadequacy instead of receiving the answers you need. But there's something else at play here. This phrase carries with it a subtle form of judgment. It implies that emotional expression is a flaw, that intensity equals irrationality. It suggests that if you cry, raise your voice, or repeat yourself, you're no longer credible, you're simply being dramatic. Yet, we are all human, and human beings are emotional creatures. We raise our voices when we feel unheard, we cry when we feel betrayed, and we repeat ourselves when we feel like the truth is being ignored. These are not signs of being dramatic. They are signs of investment, they're evidence that something matters to you. And more often than not, they are responses to the slow, painful realization that the person you care about is not being honest with you. When a man is cheating, or even just thinking about it, there's a part of him that already knows he's in the wrong. But instead of confronting that truth, it's easier to project the discomfort onto you. If you're being dramatic, then he gets to remain calm, logical, and collected. He gets to hold the moral high ground, not because he's innocent, but because he's quieter. This is a dangerous illusion because quietness is not always synonymous with truth. In fact, sometimes quietness is just a strategic, intentional choice to avoid confronting uncomfortable realities. And sometimes, the person who stays calm during confrontation isn't being honest. They're simply better at hiding what they don't want exposed. This phrase, "you're being dramatic," also creates long-term emotional imbalance. If it's repeated often enough, it trains you to filter your own reactions. You start shrinking your emotions, second-guessing yourself before you speak, rehearsing your tone, trying to package your feelings in a way that won't be thrown back at you. But here's the problem. That's not communication, it's performance. And over time, that performance becomes exhausting. It disconnects you not just from your partner, but from yourself. You begin to forget what it feels like to say what you truly mean. And in doing so, you lose touch with your own emotional truth. Meanwhile, he avoids scrutiny while continuing the behaviors that are slowly eroding the relationship from the inside out. What's particularly damaging about this phrase is that it can become a barrier to emotional intimacy. True intimacy requires vulnerability, openness, and the ability to sit with discomfort. But when "you're being dramatic" enters the picture, that space for vulnerability shrinks. The message becomes clear. Only certain emotions are welcome here. As we move forward, let's explore how this subtle manipulation erodes the foundation of trust and intimacy in a relationship, and how you can begin to rebuild those critical emotional connections. As we've discussed, the phrase "you're being dramatic" is a subtle way to shut down conversation and shift focus away from the issue at hand. Now, let's dive deeper into another phrase often used to deflect and manipulate emotions: "you don't trust me." This phrase at first glance may seem like a genuine cry for reassurance, but in the wrong context, it becomes a trap, a way to manipulate your feelings and turn the conversation around. The next time a serious conversation is brushed off with "you're being dramatic," pay close attention to not just what was said, but to what was avoided. In relationships where betrayal exists, it's rarely exposed by what's openly admitted. More often, it's revealed by what gets dismissed, mocked, or shut down. The lie isn't always in the words themselves. Sometimes, it's in the refusal to truly engage with the concerns you've expressed. When a man says "you don't trust me" in response to questions about his actions that have raised genuine concern, it's important to recognize that he's not necessarily seeking to rebuild trust. Instead, he's flipping the script. Rather than addressing your doubts with clarity or offering transparency, he shifts the burden onto you. The question no longer becomes, "what am I doing that feels dishonest?" Instead, it becomes, "why can't you trust me?" And just like that, the entire subject shifts. You're no longer evaluating his behavior. Now, you're justifying your emotional reaction to it. This phrase carries a specific emotional weight designed to make you feel guilty. It suggests that the breakdown lies not in his choices, but in your suspicion that somehow you've introduced poison into the relationship by doubting him. But doubt doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not a character flaw. Doubt is a natural response to inconsistency. When someone you care about begins acting differently, when their energy changes, their presence becomes sporadic, or their habits shift without explanation, your instincts light up. That's not paranoia. That's your emotional radar doing its job, signaling that something isn't quite right. So, when he says, "you don't trust me," what he's really doing is turning your emotional awareness into a moral failure. He's framing your alertness as betrayal, which is a powerful manipulation tactic. The danger lies in the fact that instead of pushing further to explore what's truly going on, many people freeze. They start to second-guess themselves. Maybe I am being unfair. Maybe I'm projecting. Maybe my fear is the problem. In that moment, you've been steered away from what caused the fear in the first place. The real issue becomes obscured, and the manipulator remains unchallenged. The cheating man doesn't need to lie directly. He just needs to make you feel ashamed for even asking the question. There's also a subtle manipulation of loyalty in this phrase. It implies that love should automatically come with trust no questions asked. That to love someone is to believe them, no matter what. But that's not trust. That's blind acceptance. Real trust is earned. It's built slowly over time through consistency, truthfulness, and emotional safety. When that consistency is broken, when actions don't match words, when stories have holes, when closeness is replaced by distanced doubt, becomes a natural response. And instead of confronting the behaviors that led to the doubt, he'll try to make you feel guilty for having it. As we move forward, let's explore how this emotional manipulation undermines trust and loyalty in relationships, and how you can begin to regain control over your own emotional responses. As we've explored, when trust is replaced by secrecy, doubt becomes a natural and rational response. Trust isn't something static in a relationship. It's a living, breathing entity that either grows or shrinks with each decision made. So, when the phrase, "you don't trust me," is used, it can also serve as a barrier away to shut down further questioning without providing real answers. If you press for clarity, you might be met with hurt expressions, silence, or even anger. Suddenly, you're not just dealing with the original issue, you're managing his emotion she's disappointment, his sadness, and the sudden portrayal of himself as the victim of your supposed distrust. This emotional shift can leave you confused, questioning if your concerns are valid. You may even start trying to reassure him, comfort him, and make him feel trusted again. But in the process, the original issue gets buried, and he gets more space to continue hiding whatever he's been doing. In relationships where infidelity exists, emotional deflection is one of the most frequently used tools. It's not always about lying, it's about redirecting the emotional weight. The focus shifts from the one hiding something to the one searching for the truth, and over time, this emotional redirection can wear you down. It can cause you to quiet your voice, second-guess your feelings, and even apologize for reactions that were completely justified. So, when this phrase surfaces, it's important to pause, not to yell, not to withdraw, but to observe. The presence of the question itself doesn't prove guilt. But when it's used as a shield, when it's used to avoid accountability and make you feel like the villain in your own story, then it's no longer about trust. It's about control. In any healthy relationship, trust should never be weaponized against the person who's simply trying to understand what's changed. When you put all of these phrases together, "I need some space," "Don't be so insecure," "She's just a friend," "You're being dramatic," "You don't trust me," they form more than just isolated phrases. They form a pattern of emotional evasion, a pattern of turning the truth sideways. These words are not used to connect, they are used to conceal. When spoken in isolation, each of these phrases might seem defensible, even reasonable, but in the context of betrayal, they are not explanations. They are defense mechanisms. They are the verbal sleight of hand that's used to make you question your instincts, doubt your observations, and take the blame for noticing what was never meant to be seen. If you feel like something is wrong, it's not because you're insecure, dramatic, or broken. It's because your mind and body are picking up signals long before your heart is ready to accept them. Words can lie, but patterns never do. Pay attention to them. Trust the shift in energy more than the softness of an excuse. Because a man who respects your mind and heart will never make you feel crazy for trying to protect them. Now that we've unpacked how words and patterns can manipulate our emotions, let's look at how to reclaim our trust in ourselves and in the relationships that truly value us. We've explored some of the subtle tactics in relationships and the words that can erode trust and make us doubt ourselves. But the most important thing to remember is trust is not something easily exploited. When you feel that something isn't right, that's when you need to listen to and respect your own feelings. If you notice these signs in your relationship, don't fall into the trap of manipulation. Stand firm, trust yourself, and demand transparency. Only when we understand what we're facing can we build healthy, lasting relationships. Thank you for watching this video. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like and share it with your friends. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more exciting and valuable videos. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on these topics. I'd love to hear from you and engage in a conversation. Together, let's create better relationships.